There are several different types of martial arts systems which exist today. For instance, you could choose to study an empty hand or a weapons-based system. The system you choose to study could focus on striking, kicking, grappling, or a combination of all three. There are internal and external systems, hard and soft systems. The options are many, but regardless of the system being studied, at their core, all martial arts systems are built from principles. And there are certain types of principles that are present in all martial arts. Being able to categorically identify these can help you better understand why you're learning the things that you're learning, which is essential in order to become not just a practitioner of some martial arts system, but a true martial artist.
You know, on a beautiful day, one of the things I love to do is get outside and go on a hike. Sometimes I like to be a bit adventurous and follow a random path just to see where it leads to. Other times, I like to come here because for me, this is the perfect place to just sit and think or even meditate. I'm guessing you're wondering what the point is. Well, while it can be fun to be adventurous and follow a random trail, if you have a specific destination in mind, you better know where the path you're on is leading you to. And in martial arts, this is what the foundational principles are for. They're designed to help you better understand why the system that you're studying is structured the way it is. At this point, you'd probably like an example. And while every system is different, many have some form of self-defense techniques. So let's start by looking at some of the foundational principles behind self-defense techniques. The first thing you need to know, you're never going to use a self-defense technique in a fight because that's not what they're designed for. I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? These guys are learning and practicing self-defense techniques, but they're never going to use them? That's right. See, self-defense techniques are designed to teach the combative principles. And it's the lessons that you learn from your techniques that you're going to actually apply, not the techniques themselves. Now, you might be wondering, why not just learn the principles? Why even bother with learning self-defense techniques at all? Well, I think it'll help if we discuss the first type of combative principles that you should be learning. And those are kinematic principles, or principles of motion. Here we're exploring the geometry of motion. And what that means is we're learning how to effectively describe motion. And this is an important first step in being able to develop a greater understanding of the possibilities of motion. So why is that important? Because it's only through a clear understanding of the possibilities of motion that we'll be able to develop greater command over motion. But here's the thing. This can't be accomplished by looking at our basics in isolation of each other. We have to look at our basics in combination with one another. And this is something self-defense techniques do really well. Now, you might be wondering, why self-defense techniques? Can all this be accomplished through the use of forms instead? Certainly it can. Remember, there's more than one path you can take in learning the principles. But if you choose one path over another, I would advise trying to have a clear reason for that choice. And while I teach and practice several forms, I place greater emphasis on self-defense techniques. And the reason for that is that in really understanding motion, you have to treat each technique as if it were a pattern, and then search to establish connections between those patterns. Now, again, this can all be accomplished through forms, as many forms present us with a string of techniques. But if you think of each pattern as if it were a piece of a puzzle, you see that when learning a form, the puzzle comes pre-assembled. When learning your self-defense techniques, you have to search to establish those connections. And therein lies the value. And if students go through that process correctly, at some point, they'll discover that there's more than one way the pieces can fit together. Now we know the first step is exploring the possibilities of motion, but there's a catch. See, just because it's possible doesn't guarantee its effectiveness in sparring or self-defense. So you have to be careful. It's not enough to just know what's possible. You have to also understand what's practical. Why don't we turn to the next types of combative principles and see if they can help us better understand how to achieve this. So once you understand how to move, the next step is understanding how to maximize the effectiveness of your movements. And we can do this by learning how to create greater impact force for our striking and kicking techniques, as well as learning how to create greater leverage for our grappling techniques. Now that leads us into our next category of principles, which are called dynamic principles. Here, we're exploring the nature of our interaction with our opponent, which is going to require us to develop an understanding of the nature of force, as well as an understanding of the role that proper body mechanics, body momentum, and energy methods play. So there's a lot going on here, but all of this basically revolves around learning how to make our movements as powerful as possible. So you can call these dynamic principles, but you could also call them power principles as well. Now, learning how to deliver and receive maximum force requires proper structure and stability. So I think you can see, not only do we have to be familiar with dynamic principles, but in order to maximize the effect of the lessons that we're learning here, we have to understand proper structural principles as well. And again, all of this requires us to develop an understanding of the role that proper body mechanics plays, but we should also develop an understanding of the physiological response of our opponent. Now, once we're able to understand and apply the lessons that we're learning here, we should learn how to do so in a way that allows us to minimize our efforts, while at the same time, hopefully, ensures our success. And that, of course, requires good strategy, which is why our next category of principles are strategic principles. And anyone who's ever played chess understands the important role that good strategy plays. All right, so what have we learned so far? Well, the first thing we learned is that you have to be aware of the foundational principles of your system. Remember, these are the ideas that help us better understand why the system we're studying is set up the way it is. And a good system is designed to teach sound combative principles, which means you should be learning not only how to move, but how to move in the most effective and powerful way possible that allows you to maintain your structure and stability, but also incorporates sound strategy. So what's missing? Well, in order to achieve all of this, we have to employ proper training methods, which means the next category of principles are training principles. And the thing to keep in mind here is that your training methods should include both physical as well as mental, both internal in addition to external methods. Now, there's one final type of principles that I want to share with you, which you may or may not choose to include in your own list. And those are philosophical principles. Although many start martial arts simply looking to learn how to become a good fighter, most at some point along the way discover that martial arts is about much more than just fighting. See, you're not just learning how to master some opponent, you're learning how to master yourself. So I think it's worth acknowledging that these different types of principles that we've been discussing, they're not just teaching you about fighting. If you look more closely, you'll see that they're teaching you about life as well.